Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be covering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. Before we get into those questions, I want to give a special shout out to those watching live here on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube on our SMIE social networks. Also want to say to those listening on the audio-only podcast version of the Midweek Roundup, thank you for making us a part of your listening habits this week and every week. We're fortunate we've now had over 3,200 downloads for the podcast version, and including thousands and thousands of watches on our live channels and on repeat. So thank you for making this roundup a part of your international edification each week. And as we say each week with the roundup, we do have these questions that we ask. Don't come out of thin air. They come from the news stories that are happening in international education over the last few days. And those are captured in our newsletter that comes out on Mondays called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. In case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education. That's the name of the consulting business. So we started that back in 2014, the consulting business, to help provide colleagues in the field an opportunity to digest the news of the week through the newsletter and get our hot takes on the topics of the day that are driving our profession forward. But also here on the Roundup, we go a little bit more in depth into 3 of those themes that we see developing in the newsletters each week, and cover those a little bit more in depth and give us some perspective on where all of these kind of pieces fit together in a larger strategic sense for international education in the United States. The newsletters can be subscribed to in a couple different ways, either on our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Scroll down a bit, hit the subscribe button, enter your details. You'll get the email version in your inbox every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And then there's also our LinkedIn version. And between the two, we now have over 1,700 subscribers to the newsletter, all the SMIE News Fit to Share, that are folks in the profession that are getting it each week and digesting it in a manageable fashion. It's about a 5-minute read typically each week, between 20 and 30 stories on social media topics that impact our field, webinars, AI, different social platforms that are coming up. And then also the how stories in the United States, potential solutions, as well as a global roundup of how different countries are grappling with international education related news. So all that's in the newsletter, so please do subscribe if you're not already. The links to both of those will be in the chat below. So let's get right into the questions of the week. And today we start with a question that is on campus, frankly, one of the stickier wickets that you have to navigate through your conversations with senior leadership, certainly, and that's your budget, your international budget. And the question is really, how do you prioritize your international budget? And our friends at INTED, who have been doing incredible work in the marketing and consulting business for international education space for a number of years now, their team has been growing substantially over the last few years. They put out regular weekly blogs on different topics related to international ed. So there's a most recent one from last week covers budgeting framework for student enrollment projects. And they highlight in particular this go round, what specifically on budget and how you allocate funds in whatever budget you do have. And the guiding light for this article is the statement that your budget is an expression of your values. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, because where you spend your money is where you prioritize your efforts, right? In terms of what you, as a senior international leader or an international missions person that has control over budget, that's where you spend your resources on that which you think is most important. And like the Bible says, where your treasures are, that is where your heart is. And that's in terms of where your priorities are. And your budget is an expression of that. In terms of where you put your money is a reflection of what you think is most important. And this framework that we're talking about today, as it relates to prioritizing how you spend your resources, it's captured in the values piece is where I think we really need to focus our time, because we can get really caught up with a shiny new toy or new service provider that comes on the landscape that starts offering making unrealistic promises for what they can deliver in terms of yield or in terms of students or in terms of value for money, ROI, all of that. That's what they have to do to get business, right? I've been on that side of the fence before, working for service providers, and that's the overpromise, underdeliver, unfortunately, is kind of the nature of the beast in our industry. That's how a lot of international ed tech firms kind of rise and fall very quickly, because they set the stall out very boldly in terms of what they think they can deliver on. They do that for their investors because, frankly, that's how they get the funding to do what they want to do. But more often than not, they fall short and end up having to contract or eliminate staff positions that they have filled in. But for institutions, we can often get distracted from the longer term goals, the bigger picture, the strategic vision either our institution has or your international unit has for what is really the driving force of what you do in terms of international enrollment, international education, and international admissions, whatever it might be. So the focus in terms of this is not on, when it comes to budget with this article, is focusing less on tactics and more on the strategic vision and how you allocate resources in that respect. They do spend a big piece of this article talking about Jill Blondin, a good friend who's at Virginia Commonwealth. She's the SIO there, IIE's Senior International Officer of the Year, as she just received that award at the AIEA conference last week. And she has a thriving team at VCU and a really robust campus buy-in for what they're doing with international education. And she has gained a reputation recently through strategic budget workshops that she does for international educators and senior leaders, along with her colleague Paulo Zagalamilo from Western Michigan University. And Annette Cummings also at Western Michigan. So they are doing a 2.0 budget workshop in later this year. They've got a white paper that's out. We'll feature in next week's newsletter. And the driving theme for their content related to international budgeting is align your budget with your strategy, not the other way around. A strategy with whatever budget you have. So what Jill boils it down to is how the international office can't be the be-all and end-all of dollars that are spent on things related to international on campus, because it's just there never is enough in an international office budget to do all the things you need to do. It's also a piece that speaks to what are the priorities at the institution? And this is something I can relate to very well as we're dealing with this right now at UNLV. We started an internationalization project in the summer of 2021 when a new president had started during the pandemic. He had come from Wayne State in Michigan, where it had a very good SIO there. And now Ahmad Ezzedine, previous SIO of the year last year from IIE, and he wanted to replicate a lot of the success that he had internationally. He went on a lot of trips and all of that fun stuff. But when he came to UNLV, he made the decision that we need to internationalize, because we hadn't done anything as an institution to support and generate a strategy that supported our students from the initial prospect stage through to becoming successful alumni. We didn't have a robust study abroad initiatives in terms of encouraging more of our first-gen students. We're significantly a minority-serving campus, HSI, AAPIISI, PISI, and all of these things that have real weight to who we are as an institution, supporting them as the diversity of our students, but also internationalizing our campus, encouraging more students to go abroad, and building more research partnerships with institutions abroad and other related projects on that front. So this is what it boils down to is, as Jill makes out in her way she talks about this, is that aligning budget with your strategy is what it really needs to be. And what it boils down to is should boil down to is that you are trying to create institutionally a student-first experience, right? Where everything an institution does, not just the international office, but everything the institution does, supports the student success model, where it's not just about getting them in the front door, making sure they get their classes and get where they need to be, find out where everything is, and get maybe retained for the second semester. It's a full life cycle experience, right? That you're trying to build. And that's what's truly strategic approaches to international enrollment especially have a lot to do with a student-first experience, where it's not just the international office that has that responsibility, it's every office on campus. Because yes, every campus has a multicultural center or a DEI office now, or a veterans office, or advising for first-gen students, or pre-med students. Everybody has slightly different needs, and international students are certainly no exception to that. And that every office that they interact with throughout their time on campus has to be aware of what those needs are, and that what restrictions they might have legally in terms of what they can and can't do in terms of employment and during their stay, in terms of what they can do at the end of their time as a student before they graduate, all the OPT implications in STEM and all of these other things. There are restrictions on what they can and can't do, and that's something that campus-wide needs to be prioritized to be truly student-centered or student-first experiences. And budget speaks a lot to how you are spending your money doing that. On the enrollment side, it's okay, don't just buy all the new toys because they think that's going to solve your problems in terms of enrollment. If it's a conversion issue, maybe it requires you to have more of your current students being engaged with your future students throughout their prospective student stage before they arrive on campus. It's spending the money on the services you need on the back end for once they get to campus. That really says a lot about where you are prioritizing the services you do provide in terms of orientation. Are you doing airport pickups? Are you making sure you have temporary housing for them? What are you doing about food before the university residence hall food cafeterias kick in for that? All of these things are where you're spending your money shows you where your priorities are. So great article from INTED that kind of covers that, and they have downloadable 3 essential budget questions, a framework for planning that you can download, and I'll drop that link to the article in the chat as well. So that's the first question of the day. Now the second is kind of a summary of what's happening with migration strategies and changes to government policies in 3 key markets, primarily Canada, Australia, and the UK. All 3 of them have had very significant changes to government policy as it affects new students coming into the country. You've seen in the UK with their dependent student study ban, where previously dependents of students in master's degree programs or even undergraduate programs could bring their family members with them if they had proved that they had the funding for them. That has gone away as of the end of December. So now only PhD students, doctoral students that are coming in can bring dependents with. So that has cut out in two of the UK's primary markets, India and Nigeria, where the majority of dependents that had been coming previously are now no longer able to. You're already starting to see a drop-off in numbers coming from those 2 countries for master's level study. So this is something that is quite significant and will have a long-term implication in terms of numbers coming to the UK, the damage done to the reputation of the UK as a destination. You still have significant housing issues in the UK as well, in terms of universities we talked about last week that were telling students if you don't have housing prearranged before you arrive, don't come, and even if you have your visa. So really challenging difficulties for students to overcome to even want to go to end up going to the UK. You have in Australia, you've seen issues now with the changes to the migration policies in terms of the vetting process for visas and who qualifies as a genuine student. That's a new thing that the Australian government has introduced, a genuine student test to weed out a lot of what they call 2-step migrants that come for either one of 2 ways. Either come for university courses and within a semester they decide, no, I'm going, even though I was admitted for a doctoral program, I want to come and do a vocational program that's shorter, much less expensive, and I'll be done in a year and a half, 2 years max, and be able to work right away. That's kind of that first step, and then the next step they're already trying to take advantage of is a two-step process so that they can become residents in Australia. We've seen, as a result, the much stricter vetting on the visa side. We've seen visa approval rates drop dramatically from what used to be used to be 90% or higher, down to 80% or lower, and that nets out to about 90,000 fewer international students they're expecting this year as a result. In some sectors, particularly in the vocational education section for vocational colleges and also English language programs, are taking huge hits. The vocational education sector recorded a 0.0 approval rate in December for new student visas. So the vetting of who's getting approved, particularly from South Asia, has been dropping significantly in terms of the numbers that have been coming through. And India had become, like China before, the largest market in Australia post-pandemic, and now those numbers are going to probably start to drop as well. So that's going on in Australia. In Canada, you have the new trusted institutional framework or designated institutional framework that has been implemented. You have the ban on new public-private partnerships for students that start after the end of August will not have access to post-study work, the postgraduate work permit in Canada. Those that come in before are still going to have that, but that's a looming crash for that public-private partnership model in Canada. Looking forward to chatting about those topics with some Canadian colleagues when I head out to API next week. There's going to be a lot of my colleagues there north of the border that will be sharing, I'm sure, some of their adaptation strategies to these new policies that the Canadian government has implemented. And what's driving issues there, as in Australia, as in the UK, is overcrowding at a lot of these institutions. The poster child for that has been Cape Breton University in Canada, that had tripled their international enrollment, and they were up to 9,000 total students. 70% of them were international, but they don't have housing. They literally do not have anywhere to put all these people. They're living 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. Those numbers are just not sustainable. So Cape Breton has made the decision to contract their enrollment overall, and that means fewer international dollars, fewer dollars to the institution, and to ease up on the housing crunch there. But also in other places in Canada, that's happening too. But you see some significant challenges with all of this, with housing, with migration policies, with government involvement in not micromanaging, but certainly getting much more engaged in who's coming in and who's not getting in, the policies that are impacting the kinds of institutions that we want to really be bringing students in for. There's some positive turns in Canada where they're really shifting focus to master's degree candidates now, and that may open up some other opportunities that they're not presently leveraging. But these migration strategies, in terms of impact on the international education offices and departments on campus, are certainly significant. And in planning budget-wise for them, we talked about budget in the previous topic or question, it's going to be even more significant for these Canadian institutions that have become over-dependent, and UK and Australian institutions that have become over-dependent on the international dollars. As I've talked about before, in the US, we have a couple of competitive advantages. We have more capacity to enroll international students on our campuses. We're only at 5% international in the United States, whereas Canada, UK, Australia are 25% or higher, up to 30, 35%, 50% in some institutions, because there just aren't as many institutions in those countries, so they can't spread them around as much. So there's some real significant bandwidth challenges in terms of capacity for these other countries, in terms of their institutions, in terms of their housing, for enrolling many more international students. And you're going to see in all three of those countries, I think, over the next year or so, the numbers start to decline. We already know that there's an imposed cap for the next 2 years in Canada on new international student study permits that will be issued. So that's already going to be a negative for that country. UK, because of their dependent study ban and some of the other restrictions that they have, they're going to see a drop. Australia's going to see a drop. So the U.S. is sitting pretty right now, and knock on wood that things go well with the election in terms of the next presidents or continued president and policies that will not negatively impacted the international ed profession in the United States. But we'll see. Nothing's for certain in this business, for sure, and can change with the start of a war, turn of an election, economic crisis. All of these things impact what we do in international ed. But these migration strategies and the approaches Canada, UK, and Australia have taken are certainly going to be backfiring, may present or preserve some short-term political benefits in terms of we can show the public that our numbers are coming down, that there's less housing crunch, there's less strain on national health services and all of these other things. But in the long run, for international educators in those countries, there's some really tough times ahead. So my heart goes out to all of you who are going to be struggling with those issues. Now let's shift gears and talk about our last question of the day. A little bit of a depressing one, and it's one that is not a new question. It's been asked a lot, but it's certainly getting more attention in the media lately, and certainly in Africa it is, and certainly Western outlets are starting to pick up on it. And the question is, are African students being cast aside by Western nations? And I don't think, certainly on the international education level, we're not certainly casting them aside, because we see them as huge potential resources and benefits for our campus by bringing in students from Africa that have a very different perspective that helps educate our domestic students in new and unique ways that they might not be currently exposed to. That their stories are as valuable, if not more so, in terms of how they are, how they have been able to even get to the point where they can consider coming to the United States with the economic consequences in their and damage done through currency crisis and wars and famines and disease and all of these things that impact them, perhaps more so than other countries in the world. So when we talk about African students being cast aside, a lot of the evidence for that comes through frankly, the numbers that we see for visa denial rates that are, in many cases, 50% or less visa approvals for students coming from African nations to the United States, to Canada, to the UK, Australia, probably to the UK a little bit less, because Nigeria has been such a significant one, probably their third or fourth largest source market for students, but those numbers are going to be dropping. We've seen currency devaluations, particularly in Nigeria, taking a significant toll recently. But visas always seem to be the real crux of the problem for African students who are looking to study in the West. And because of issues in the past of fraudulent documents, of visa overstays, of students who come and disappear, who come and plead poverty after showing that they had $50,000 a year to spend on their education, all of those things are not unusual stories that we hear on campus. I worked at an institution, my first institution, that we required from certain West African nations, we required a full semester's tuition deposit before we would issue an I-20. I don't know if they still do that, but those are the kinds of restrictions. And that was done because we'd had so many students who had come previously who came without money, and then were those kind of poverty cases that we had to step in and support until they could either find funding through an assistantship at a graduate level, or get a scholarship to help cover their costs, or someone in the community that could house them. All these things that happen, not just for African students, but others as well, but seem to be fairly unique to that population. But the challenge we face in international ed as part of our the global south to global north challenge that we face is the brain drain that we've been accused of, taking the best and brightest from Africa and then coming to the U.S. or other countries and not leaving, talking about just the one-way traffic, really, in terms of relationships between institutions and how those need to be looked at. That's certainly something on my agenda for the next 3 or 4 years, is how do we develop truly reciprocal partnerships that have a two-way flow. So it's not just them coming to us. We need to be investing in them as well, and see that as a priority institutionally. And one of the reasons for that is the enrollment rates of African students globally are expected to hit the fastest, or to be the fastest in the next 10 years. That by 2050, 1 in 8 international students will be African. But the challenge is now, those visa issues today are preventing those numbers from really becoming realities in terms of huge numbers of African students getting the opportunity to study abroad. So even though they may have the money, and those that do are getting denied in larger numbers. So all of these things are real challenges that as institutions we need to really take a look at and work with our governments to try and figure out what that looks like. How do we support these students that want to come to the United States? I've worked at institutions, and I've seen others do it as well, that will not accept applications from African applicants in Nigeria, Ghana, other West African nations, unless they've gone through Education USA, because they know that if they see an application coming from Education USA with a recommendation letter from the advisor there, that they are getting as good an advising experience and preparation for eventual visa success than the typical student that might be working through dodgy agents in that country. So there are things that we can be doing as institutions to really work in our system with partners in country that makes sense and that are above board and can be trusted and have track records of success. And that's really what you need to have. And you can't do that on an island. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to work with students from Africa or from these particular countries because they never pay their bills and they become indigent and then they have to leave. They basically become failed students because they didn't have the support. Well, look at what the front end of that process looked like. How did you vet them properly? Or did you vet them properly? Did you rely on any in-country support to really give you a true sense of whether they are legitimate students and have even a chance of getting a visa? So these are the things that we can be doing, but it's more than just us as individual institutions working with in-country representatives. We need to be advocating for, as they have done in Canada, to have a review of their study permit issuance process for African students, that's underway to see if there are racist elements in terms of decisions that are made for African students' visas as opposed to the rest. So these are things that we have to be advocates for our future students. And if we're not, we're doing them a disservice and we're not preparing a path that's a clear one for them to be able to enroll. So these are the kind of challenges we're dealing with when we're talking about African students, but it's not something we can just put up our hands and say, no, not for me, I can't do it, it's too much work. If we're truly prioritizing diversification in our international student enrollments, Africa needs to be on the menu and needs to be a priority in terms of seeing the challenges in that market. Doesn't mean giving up. It just means you have to work a little bit differently than you do in India or in China or in Latin America or in Europe or the Middle East. You have to have strategies in place to adjust to the conditions on the ground in each country. That's the perspective you need to have going in to your recruitment approach. That is not one size fits all. You see what's happened in the UK, and I'll finish with this. I mentioned earlier that the dependent study ban has had a significant impact on master's degree and lower students that are coming to the UK because they can't bring family with anymore. That Nigerian students were like a number 2 source market for students coming with dependents previously. That you now have data that's showing that Nigerian students are no longer interested in the numbers that they were studying in the United Kingdom. That applications, particularly for undergraduate studies from Nigeria, have dropped 46%. And that's more than any other country in that period in the previous year. So what the UK is dealing with is the fallout from where those, how do we get that market back? And the government really needs to step up and do something, or universities need to be better advocates for their students and to change policy so that more students can be accommodated. So these are the challenges we're dealing with this week and the questions we're asking about in international education. So we hope you found some nuggets in here that'll be useful for you as you take back to your institution. But we wish you the very best. And next week, just a quick heads up, we'll be live from the API exhibit hall where we'll be meeting as in my role at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We'll be meeting with prospective university partners in the region, in the Asia Pacific region for partnerships with our institution. I'll be one of 2 U.S. colleges at the Education USA Pavilion. Looking forward to connecting with future partners at that program. So looking forward to connecting with you next week live from the exhibit hall in Perth, Australia. So until then, have a great day and we'll chat with you next week. Cheers.